doctor's appointments or our teaching who've asked for it. So
this meeting is being recorded.
So let me get us started. Thank you guys for coming. I know that there's lots of people who have lots of things going on. And so if you have something happening and you have to leave, like no skin off my back. This is recorded, but also I'm grateful for everybody who's here, who's taken time. I have lots of people here from all over different parts of my journey in life. And so I'm excited to have, Tandi Waisoko here all the way from the Netherlands. And so I'm grateful to have, and I think Heather's joining us from Canada. So we have quite an audience and I'm super excited to have you guys all here. And I'm grateful that you've all been part of my journey so far because you guys have all been special. So thank you. I'm gonna share my screen and get going on this. Hopefully you can see it. Can you see it?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. Welcome to my defense. I'm looking at teaching for artistic behavior. I'm working through the definition and the historiography of TAB. So this is who I am. I'm also, in my other parts of my life, a middle school art teacher. I am the NAEA Pacific Region VP-elect. And as of today, I'm still a candidate for my PhD. And so I'm super excited to be here in that role. Like, this is the reason I'm here. So for people who are not familiar with TAB, the teaching for artistic behavior, philosophy, pedagogy, movement, organization is based in these three pillars. The premise of the child is the artist, the classroom is the studio, and exploring what artists do. So we're going to go through an introduction. I'll take you through a little bit about my lit review, methods, study results, interpretations, and conclusions, and there will be time for questions. So I'm going to look through the statement of the problem and our research questions. So part of the impetus for writing this dissertation was the absence of a written history. It hinders a lot of research in the field. There's a lot of people wanting to do research, and without a written history, it makes lit reviews pretty hard to put together because there's bits and pieces all over the place, but not really anything all together. The other thing that makes TAB, other than those three pillars, there's really not a working definition for the field. And so I've explored what TAB is and also what it's not, because sometimes we define things by both the things that they are, but also the things that are not them. And then TAB has faced challenges and critiques over the years, and some of them are ones that come up over and over again. And so sometimes knowing what those critiques and challenges are really help both make a difference in sharpening our own understanding of our practice, but also having a discussion about it makes sure that people who are in the field facing these challenges have a response. And so the questions then that guide this research is the definition of TAB, what it is and what it's not, the history of TAB pedagogy and its subsequent movement. And so really looking at the context in which it originated, the background that it's situated in history, and how it connects to art education as a whole. And then the critiques and challenges, which ones should be addressed by the community going forward, and meaningful ways to help art educators also address these challenges. So review of the literature. I'm going to take you through the process of how I picked the literature, and review a little bit about art education history, and then talk about how that connects to TAB. Initial processes, how I started working through this. I worked with the Summons 2.0 UW library system search system, which is quite amazing. Actually, it's very powerful. And Google Scholar. There were terms I searched like choice-based art, learner-directed, open schools, TAB. I also searched things like people's names who are authors in the field related to TAB, people who are critics of TAB, did a lot of searching for things like that. And then as I found solid articles, I would dig through the reference sections in those articles and look for tracing sources back to their origins, but also coming up with additional research paths to explore. There were also several leading scholars in the field who gave me recommendations. I had some people sending me parts of their personal library. And so things that got included in the literature review are really things that are relevant to the topic, have been published by authorities in the art education field, or in the fields related to their methodologies, and then the literature referenced articles and books. And so that's how I picked things to go into this selection process. Through this, I was able to put a rough timeline of history of art education in the US, starting from when Catholic missionaries needed to have skilled labor. And so they trained people in art so that they could have laborers to build and create art for their missions. Moving into the late 1700s, early 1800s, how art education came over from Eurocentric vision of how art academies worked across Europe. And then world fairs really honestly played a huge part in art education, especially when the US was not producing quality goods to sell, and it became an economy issue where we weren't going to be competitive with our goods and wares, that we were going to struggle as an economy with the rest of the world. And so that actually created the impetus for having some of the first drawing classes in Massachusetts. We ended up having some of the first legislation about art education. Any school, any town with at least 10,000 people ended up having a drawing program in Massachusetts. Then we move into progressivism and Dewey and things that worked until we end up in the world wars and things start falling apart again. With the world wars and people immigrating and moving around, we ended up with several prominent art education leaders who made a big impact on art education in the US, including Victor Lowenfeld, who has fairly direct influence in TAB. We move forward in this kind of child-centered approach, Lowenfeld having written some of the leading textbooks that were used at the time. At the same time, in that 1960s, the world is lots of unrest. There was a seminar at Penn State, and this created the seeds of DBAE, so that when Sputnik happened and there was this race to space, and we realized how far, I don't know if we were actually that far behind, but the Nation at Risk report came out, signaling that math and sciences were going to be the focus. And really from there, standards came through with Goals 2000 in the mid 90s, and art became distinct disciplines. One of the distinct disciplines in education, with discipline-based art education really moving to the forefront through the 80s and 90s. And then as we've continued through this assessment and accountability era, into ESSA and things, in the 21st century, we really expanded back out, moving a lot of way. There's still plenty of teachers teaching with DBA styles. Again, that's discipline-based arts education, but also have moved forward into STEAM and visual culture and TAB, among other things. So main influences leading into TAB, Victor Lowenfeld was huge. One of the founders, John Crow, was very Lowenfeldian. He was a Lowenfeld trained art educator and brought that to TAB. British infant primary schools following World War II, as part of World War II, British schools were overrun in rural areas as they were moving large amounts of youth out of big industrial areas. They were targets for bombings. And so these smaller schools started having more students than they could handle at different ages and different situations. And they created the British infant primary system, where students would come in and enroll, and there'd be 3 grades together. And it worked for them because their society and culture needed it. Much like we recently have been studying Finland in the US, where we continue to send people over and go, oh, the Finnish system is amazing. Look at all the great things they're doing. And not translating the rest of all the context of Finland. At the time, in the 60s, the British infant primary schools were being studied. And when that information came back to the US, it translated into open education and open classrooms. And so in the 70s, open education was a big thing. Pauline Joseph, one of the other founders of TAB, was working directly underneath Roland Barthes, who was one of the leading writers and researchers related to open education. And so there's some direct ties to Lowenfeld and open education in TAB. Additional influences, and this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but some that I'd like to point out, like Peter London and George Sekeli, Studio Habits of Mind with Ellen Winter and Lois Hetland. Al Hurwitz was one of Pauline's principals at another point. David Fraser was one of Kathy Douglas's colleagues for a while, and she really attributes his decision to have a summer camp as part of the impetus for how TAB happened. Abigail Hausen with visual thinking strategies was who Diane Jaquith did some of her master's research underneath and worked as a research assistant. Montessori and Reggio Emilia, while were influenced by them, we have not really influenced them. It was not a two-way thing, but there's a lot of connections there. John Dewey, of course, progressivism, Jerome Bruner, Lev Vygotsky, Piaget, and Victor D'Amico all also played a part in this. So moving into the methods of how this research worked, the theoretical framework, we're going to look at the research methodologies and then design and data collection. The framework that underlies how I approach research as a whole is I'm a pragmatist. That means that I'm going to pick the method that fits the research needs the best, because research happens in the context and I don't believe that one way of always approaching research works for me. Social constructivism is the other underlying philosophy that I use really and the theory that I use to working with people together to co-construct meaning, and realizing that my participation as researcher does influence the research itself. So I worked qualitatively. So these are the two main methodologies that I used, narrative and then art education historical research. I took parts from life history narratives. They have data verification and validity related to triangulation of data. So looking at the people I interviewed, but also then double checking their stories against other people's stories and documents and artifacts. Interviews were used because there are lots of things that are not necessarily measurable by observing, especially related to history. And then oral histories, trying to find and primary sources. So the people with firsthand knowledge were the ones contributing to this work. Art educational historical research, Marianne Stankwitz's work with how to create meaningful stories and interpretations of the facts through collecting data and then creating chronological timelines, then interpreting those into a narrative, is really the methodology that I picked for a good chunk of my research. So between these two different methodologies, it created a framework for how I was able to find the rest of my work. I did 20 semi-structured interviews. And while that means 20 different participants, there were several participants that had multiple interviews. This was a purposeful sampling. So I intentionally picked founders of TAB, next level leaders, influencers, and critics. I worked with the amazing Carla Hoff, transcriptionist, who transcribed these interviews for over 5,000 minutes of transcription, which these transcripts were then processed in two different cactuses, the main one being Delve and then Procedon. In these interviews, people who were founders or next level leaders were asked 14 different questions, while critics and influencers were asked 8. And I don't even know how many other things that I've looked through over the years. This has been 8 years in the works. So convention books, articles, photographs, books people have shared with me, books that I have found, books that people have written, social media posts to verify dates and to check different kinds of things. So much data related to this history. So here's some of the results. I'm going to talk a little bit about the data and analysis and coding, and then the findings related to the research questions. So the data analysis and coding, and definitely as people are interested, I can open these and talk a little bit more about them. Delve is a really powerful coding system that I found that was really friendly user interface. I was able to load the transcripts in on the side, and then each section I was able to code with different codes as it became meaningful. The codes that I set were ones that I brought to the coding book that were related to the research questions, as well as emerging themes that were really things that found, as more that I read through the transcripts and were coding, emerged from the data. The other major piece is Precedent. This is the only timeline software that I could find that would work for what I needed it to. I had a timeline running for each person. Tab itself got its own timeline. I could create events in this timeline. Each event could have information built into it. And then at the bottom of this timeline visual, there's a chronological timeline running underneath. When I downloaded this, it was 72 pages of data related to timelines. And so there's really so much there, more than I could put in the dissertation. But it really was, it helped me align and triangulate data so I could make sure, like if somebody said they were here, I could look down and see who else had been there. So the thematic findings that emerged from this research really was related to, again, that research question of trying to define TAB with what it is and what it is not. And the thematic findings that emerged mainly were related to curriculum and philosophy, about how TAB is shaped and the pedagogy and experiences the way that students engage with learning. The child as the artist really is the heart of TAB, where the students are centered in the middle of the learning, and it really makes it unique in the field of pedagogies, especially at the time that it was originated. What do artists do? Exploring what TAB students do as they become artists, working to engage them with developmentally appropriate focus and expectations for what an artist would be in the age group that they're working in. And then classrooms, the studio. This is remembering that these are shared studio spaces, but allowing and creating opportunities for students to have agency and explore their own ideas. And then the role of the teacher. Well, this hasn't been explicit in TAB, like the TAB pillars don't ever talk about the role of the teacher, but it was really obvious in the literature that the role of the teacher is an unwritten tenet of TAB. And so how to guide and support and model for students' learning. And then the advantages of TAB, really working with deeper engagement and interpersonal skills and authentic expression for students. Things that emerged is not TAB. TAB is not teacher driven. It is not laissez-faire. It is not a free-for-all. Kids are not just let loose. And it is not look-alike projects. It is not a program where you're going to have artworks that look like they came from a same set of directions. So from this, the proposed working definition, in addition to the thematic findings, each participant was interviewed, was asked for their definition of TAB. So I included the 20 different definitions of TAB, and from all of this data, I created this one as a working definition that is not the end all be all, because I'm sure this will continue to evolve. But TAB is fundamentally at its core a pedagogical philosophy that places the child at the center. From this position, the child is given agency as the artist, helping the child understand what it is to be an artist, is the role of the educator. And all of this occurs in an environment that is designed to promote autonomy. The next research question really was related to the history of TAB itself. So these are the giant milestones for TAB. This section took up a huge amount of the dissertation, and so this is a super summary. Kathy Douglas and John Crow met when they were working in the same district. Actually, Kathy was on John's hiring committee. When John and Kathy were, John was presenting at the Massachusetts Art Education Conference, they met Pauline Joseph. John eventually joined the faculty at Mass Art. Diane Jaquith worked in the same district in Newton with Pauline. When they met in 97, well, Pauline and Diane met before 97, but Diane attended one of the presentations at the NAEA convention in New Orleans in 1997, where Kathy was presenting, and they hit it off from there. In 1999, Diane was the one who added the third tenet, the classroom as the studio. So before that and up to 1999, it really was the child as the artist, and what do artists do. During this time, the Knowledge Loom was available. It was through Brown University. It was hosted as one of the resources to be able to figure out what TAB was. There are still places it floats around the internet, archived I think now Tab Inc., the organization, has a website where you can actually access a copy of the original Knowledge Loom. At the time that Tab was really starting to take off through national presentations, social media became a thing. Yahoo Groups was started. This was really the place. If you were going to learn about Tab, you joined the Yahoo group. In 2012, the Facebook group got started. Originally, it was just for Midwest Tab educators. It became the official Tab group and was the main place that people did Tab sharing and community building until I believe 2000, when Mighty Networks became and went online. And so Mighty Networks is now the social media app that people use, although there are still active people on Facebook. Yahoo Groups is no longer a thing, but it has been archived, and I am one of the 3 people with access to that archive at the moment. As Tab continued to grow, there were more books written, so many conventions for NAEA where Tab was presented, state and regional conferences, regional groups sprouted up, and summer institutes happened at Mass Art, as well as summer gatherings before that. In 2015 was the first time that Tab decided to try to be an interest group with the National Art Education Association. It did not become an interest group in 2015 because the Tab had already incorporated at that point, and so due to the policies of NAEA, it was not eligible to become an interest group. So Tab was dropped off the name and it became the choice-based art education interest group with NAEA in 2016. This was the time that the language that had been synonymous between Tab and choice-based split. It's one of the visible times where that language evolved. And then as more of the founders stepped further into retirement, the board, the organization of how Tab, the organization itself was organized, was restructured. And so moving from a handful of directors into a board, a larger sitting board, happened in 2019. Jen Rankizona was the first president after Kathy. Kathy had been the president, then Diane, and then Jen Rankizona. And Jen Ferrari just recently took over as the current president of Tab Inc. So the last research question really is looking at challenges and critiques. So people on the outside looking in. So the people that were interviewed to participate in this research are highly regarded in the field of art education, and they have various understandings and interactions with Tab in different ways. The challenges facing Tab were really the challenges remarked on by the people who are inside of Tab. So things that individuals inside of Tab found challenging are how to communicate Tab to non-Tab educators, how to engage students lacking motivation and engagement, and then reaching out to teachers who aren't and don't quite understand what Tab is. And then the critiques of Tab, things that came up as things to be aware of, is that Tab has been criticized for prioritizing breadth over depth. There's a lot of concern around people maybe not understanding students having a solid foundation of skills. And then also that Tab could be more informed by contemporary education practices, as well as addressing things like more large-scale collaboration rather than students deciding to collaborate on small scales or just a few students together, but really scaffolding collaboration towards other ends. There were 2 main published critiques of Tab, one being Ken Vyeth and Dan Bush's article in 2008, essentially thinking that choice-based art education was going to be the end of art educators' careers as a whole because students could just teach themselves, and what role did the teacher have at all. Olivia Yudi had a really beautiful article, New School Art Styles, where she mentioned Tab as in a way that maybe wasn't how she intended, but also not received as well as could have been. As a result, both articles had responses written to them by people involved in Tab and were published also. And so it became part of a conversation in the art education world to have these things out, published, and are still available. So through all of this, I have my own responses to the research questions, and recommendations for the field, and recommendations for future research. So part of the things that I discovered, that there's a muddy middle. So the line that is between what's tab and what is not tab, is in flux, and how people determine what that is, and how who's policing that or monitoring that, and who decides what tab is or is not. My personal belief is that if the pendulum between teacher directed and student centered is swinging, if the pendulum falls more often on the side of student directed, I feel for myself that leads me to be a tab teacher. So I am a tab teacher who I firmly believe in the premise and methodologies of tab, but I also am a modified choice teacher, scaffolding for students. So Tom Burkle is one of the 3 people who created a continuum of choice. Really, John Crow was the first in 2001. Diane Jaquith's is the most widely used, and it's been published several times in a variety of different ways with small alterations. But Tom Burkle was at the Colorado Art Education Association conference, and this is where I had access to this continuum of choice for the first time. And it gave me permission to realize that I don't have to be an all or nothing tab educator. I didn't have to be full student choice to be still able to have a choice structure in my classroom. And so while I scaffold choice for students, Tom Burkle's continuum of choice allowed me to scaffold my own practice into offering more choice for students. So recommendations to the field, I presented these as letters to different groups. There's a letter to the TAB Inc. board. There's a letter to practicing TAB educators, one to TAB curious educators, one to non-TAB educators, admin. This one is an excerpt from my letter to higher education, knowing that there's plenty of higher educators in the audience today. And I deeply appreciate the work that goes into you nurturing art educators in the field, because every time we graduate someone in art education, many times they stay in the career. Hopefully we have less attrition as we go forward. I know that's been a problem lately, but knowing that over the lifespan of a person who leaves with an art education degree could impact thousands of students, it is important that TAB become one of the methodologies presented, and understanding what that is in a foundational way can help present that if that's not a methodology that's familiar to you. And so that's part of my open letter to higher education. And then future recommendations for research. There's so much here. There's more research than I could do in my research career, and actually several. If I had several lifetimes to do research, there's still more research to be done. In relation to education with educators, you can look at educators who are in the field and what they're doing with TAB, how pre-service education happens and higher education practices around that, as well as professional development to support educators who are in the field that would like to continue learning more. Related to students themselves, does TAB work with all students in all settings? There's a lot to be learned there. How does it impact students as they go? So I have so many questions. The context TAB occurs in, how does that impact how TAB works, knowing that as TAB educators, even who've experienced, move into different segments of education or change grade levels or change schools, how they present TAB changes. And then looking at TAB compared to other methodologies and pedagogies really is another space to do quite a bit of research. So many gratitudes. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but thanks to my committee, thanks to everyone I interviewed, my transcriptionist and editor, my own family and my friends, as well as the awards that I've received that have helped with this research, and so many people who have helped me on this path, so many of you guys who are here. And so now I'm going to take questions. I will stop sharing.
Hi, Abby. Oh, I just have a question because I have a former student that was using TAB methods in her classroom, and she ended up not signing her next year's contract because of how there was no understanding of her methods. So I guess my question really would be, how do we have the art teachers inform their principals of what they are doing, and to, help them to be able to use this type of methodology?
I think self-advocacy is, I think, part of the role of every art educator. I think that, like most art educators, regardless of pedagogy, really struggle with having administrators understand what happens in their classroom. And so I think part of it is having a conversation about process versus product and outcomes. I think also it has a lot to do with how you present what's happening in your classroom. Are you inviting people in to see it? But also when you put up artwork in the hallways that is not what people are used to seeing, are there statements put up with it? Are there explanation of what's occurring? Are you sharing with parents what's happening? Are you talking with class? I had problems with classroom teachers who was like, I think that my kids could do better than this. And they could if I guided them a lot more with a lot more structure. But having them understand that self-discovery is really meaningful for students. And so I think a lot of it is about conversations and taking time to make learning visible. And that there's, I think Diane Jaquith really put in that it is one of the things that teaching TAB it can be exhausting because it is really extra work, because you are advocating for your program and you're trying to explain what students are doing. And because students are doing different things, there's a lot of documentation that I think is valuable. And I think for when you're working in a school where that has not been in place, I think that can be a hard transition if the communication's not there. So I hope that answers your question.
I'm trying to unmute.
Oh, almost there. You're still muted, Joyce. Joyce, you're muted. Still muted.
She tried a lot of things. There was just such not an understanding that, she took time off. Anyways, thank you. Hopefully something could be put in place, or, where people, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of changes where it'll be more accepted, but yeah, thank you for that answer.
Well, and I think, one of the things that has occurred in the process of me doing this is I've learned a lot and I've met people. And now I'm also a co-host for a national podcast. And so one of the people that we have lined up, Jen Ferrari and I co-hosted every month. But we've had several administrators approach us and say, we're not sure how to be administrators to our TAB teachers. We don't know what the look-fors are when we go into the classroom. What supports can you provide? So I know TAB Inc. as an organization is hoping to build some resources out for administrators, but also we're looking to have conversations with administrators, asking them what they are looking to see and what they hope to find, and what they should be seeing in a TAB classroom. What does good TAB practice look like? So,
thank you.
I'll just jump in briefly and say I think that's a really important question. And, I like what Abby has to say. Communication's a lot of it. And I think it's simply being able to explain this is a different way of doing business, but it doesn't mean, kind of like your what TAB is not. It doesn't mean anything goes. It doesn't mean our students aren't meeting standards. And let me show you documentation of these kids' growth over time. I think that's a part of the response as well.
I wanted to jump in here because I'll have to leave in just a few minutes, but it was very interesting to read your history because it was partly my history. I was at Mass College of Art just before John Crow, and I heard a lot about him as he took over. And one of the things I wanted to mention about Mass Art, which was very important for me, was that it had an artist-teacher model of teacher preparation. And it seems to me that is kind of almost a prerequisite for TAB teachers, that they develop themselves as artists in a reflective practitioner kind of model, and, then they can, not only walk the walk, they can talk the talk, they can talk about their work reflectively and they can talk about the development of their work as an artist, and hopefully they keep working as artists. As you talked about, John Crow is a great example of that. He's still trucking, after all these years. So I wanted to mention that, and the other thing I wanted to bring up is we talked, when we first met, we talked about Arts Propel versus DBAE, and one of the things that I thought was so powerful about Propel, and I think it carries over into Studio Habits, is this idea of making reflection and assessment visible and, documenting the students' work and stuff. And I remembered there was at Propel, there was like 3 or 4 different art forms being dealt with. There's creative writing, there was music, and there was visual art, and occasionally dance. And one of the amazing things that happened is the music people had their students write reflectively about what was going on in rehearsals and what they were learning during the rehearsals. And the parents are all thinking about the performance, and the principal's thinking about the football game and the band and all that stuff. But they don't necessarily know that people are thinking as they work, And this was very well documented by the students themselves before a performance or whatever. So if the performance wasn't stellar, if the football team lost, whatever could happen, they could say, these kids are really learning stuff. And I was hoping that that might be more kind of upfront, especially if you're dealing with principals, and especially if you're dealing with art shows. Just a little paragraph of, what I was, and the other thing about the exhibitions is they were often process as well as product based. There would be steps along the way that should show the evolution. So I think these are really important compliments to what you're doing. But in general, I was just very, very impressed with, first of all, your own writing and how you gathered all this information and how you coded and everything. I thought, boy, this is going to be, you're going to be, really helping the field. So I just wanted to thank you, and also to thank your mentors on the screen. You've been very fortunate to have such good guidance, I believe, and they're very fortunate to have you as their prodigy, or what do you call it? What do you call it when somebody works with you? I forget the word. Anyway,
I don't know,
colleague or something.
Hopefully colleague soon. So.
Yes, one of these days. Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna disappear, but I'll be here for a little bit longer. But I'm gonna vanish.
Thank you, Seymour.
Screen. Thank you, Abby.
Good morning, Michael.
Hey, Abby, congratulations. Really wonderful. I'm Mike Lang with the Wyoming Arts Council, and I'm also on the DOC program for higher education, and just wanted to take a minute and say thank you to Abby for, of course, all of this wonderful work, but your work in supporting the field across the state, both inside and outside of the classroom. And I also am one of the lucky folks that have a daughter in one of Abby's classes right now, which is really great, all the connections. So, I think we talk about the value of the arts a lot, and the value of arts education in many ways to really try to make policymakers happy and administrators happy. So my question for you, not related to that, but I'm wondering how you believe TAB brings joy to your students.
Sometimes it doesn't. I've had one student when I took over the program at the middle school. She took art 2, and she was like, "You mean you want me to have my own idea? I wouldn't have signed up for art 2 if I knew I was gonna have to think for myself." And those were her words. But I had a student at the beginning of the semester in Kaylee's class, who goes, "You trust me to have my own idea?" He's like, "You're just gonna let me make my own art." And I was like, "That's what I just told you to do, was have your own idea." And he goes, "Nobody's ever trusted me to make my own art." And I thought, you're an 8th grade student, and we haven't ever let you be an artist yourself. And so it is those moments. There are plenty of frustrating moments where I'm like the students who struggle with ideas and motivation. And there's still, I don't know, I love that TAB allows this to be a relational practice. I get to learn a lot about the students themselves and what their interests are and how they want to move forward. I have a student who I've had him off and on, and he has struggled with what to do and has not seen himself as an artist. And this semester he discovered rain sticks for himself, and he has made a whole series of duct tape rain sticks. I think he's got like 6 or 7 made now, and he's roped in like 3 or 4 other kids into making rain sticks. And they've been doing surface decoration with them. They've been trying different things, the different nails, different beads. It's fun to see kids explore things, but also to make space for them to explore things that I wouldn't necessarily present. And I think that that's one of the criticisms, again, is skills. And I talked with Kathy Douglas this last week, and she's like, "Skills, who's making the list of skills? How many skills are we going to give them? where is this big list of skills that they have or don't have? And I was like, well, that's a good point. And there are things that kids will explore that are not things I would teach them. There are things that I am not a printmaker by nature. It stresses me out. But I have kids who fall in love with printmaking and they do it, and I can support them and guide them, but I don't have to own all the information. I don't have to be the source of all of the information. I get to learn with them, and that's joyful. And it's fun when they can teach me. There are times when they come in with more skills than I have in an area, and they're teaching each other. Two of my students decided that they wanted to do pottery. One of them has been on me to learn it, and so I taught him, and then he taught himself pretty well. And this is a child that does not want to do much, but he taught himself pottery. And then another of his friends decided they want to do pottery, and he took it upon himself to teach the other kid. So he was perpetuating the learning. He became the teacher, and his learning was increased by that. And that, I mean, I have a picture of the two of them throwing together, and they are some of the boys that struggle the hardest with doing anything productive in class. One of these kiddos, he was like, I can do anything. And he created a 3D model board game where he has like a mountain and traps, and he created little characters to go around it. And right now I think he's working on a fishing pole out of glue sticks. We're still working on how the structure works on that. Not quite the rigidity needed for a fishing pole, but he's got an idea and he's following it. And that's exciting. It's a lot of joy every day. I love what I do every day.
Abby, thank you so much. And again, thank you for all you do to help support the arts across the state.
Well, thank you as well. Good luck in your new position.
So Abby, I have sort of a broader question. You moved into this space and chose this as your research direction, I think for very personal reasons, and wanting to kind of like know better where you were coming from or who you were, I don't think of how to put it, the ground you were standing on. Maybe that's it. So I know it's embedded in that incredible document, but I was wondering if you could speak, in a sort of more abbreviated way about, some of the most interesting things that you discovered in this journey, or maybe most useful for you in that personal side. And then on the other side of it, this is, I think, going to be a great resource and maybe, great springboard. So it's two questions, personal side. And then out of this, what do you think the benefits that you see are to the community and how your research could be used going forward?
Personal benefits. There was a lot of freedom in talking to the founders and realizing how they implemented this practice in their own world. When I realized that John Crow would be considered modified choice if he was practicing today, his Lowenfeld roots are strong. I don't think that he would have jumped ship to be full choice. It gave me the realization that I can live in that space. And I think a lot of times there's this idea or stereotype that the end goal is to be full choice. And I don't think I don't feel that need anymore. I can be a TAB educator and believe that the child is the artist and that my classroom is their studio and we are exploring what artists do. But I am also able to say, I'm going to support you in this and I'm going to scaffold you when you need it. And we are going, that there are parameters and guidelines and this is the classroom. I'm still an educator and I want to mentor, but also learn with you and be a learner with you. But at the end of the day, I have more, my teaching career is 18 this year. This is my 18th year teaching. I have a lot of experience and I have a lot of knowledge and materials they might not have access to. And so how do I share that in a meaningful way? Just like I share those experiences with my peers who are colleagues when we make art together. There are art teachers here in Laramie who some days we have brunches or art making days and we talk about our practice together. And so that's my personal side. Like I've grown in the confidence I have and how I approach TAB. I have presented the history of TAB a little bit more in detail with a little bit less of my methodologies. Pete saw, I don't know if you made it to all of it at NAEA, but I presented it in Colorado and I presented it at NAEA this year. And yesterday I received a text message from one of the people I met at NAEA who attended my session and just said, I just want you to know that your presentation at NAEA has made all the difference. I'm changing my practice and my teaching the way that I teach and approach studio thinking with my students. He goes, I just wanted to let you know that your research has ripples and, you know, you're making waves even down in Missouri right now. And so I think that already this research is valuable. I don't know. I don't think I ever approached anybody and said, please, can I read your dissertation? But I have had more people waiting for this to be approved and published because they're waiting for it to be out. Countless. I'm trying to think of I'm making a mental list of all the people I need to send this announcement that this is out and available to read, because so many people have been interested in reading this. Because this is the first and right now the only history of TAB. And I guess one of the things that did shock me was, so I met with Kathy Douglas this weekend, and one of the things she said is like, I learned so much from what you wrote. And I was like, wait a minute, what are you doing learning from what I wrote? This is your story. And she goes, no, I didn't know all the parts of it. And so right now I'm holding all the parts, even the parts that the people in the story don't always have. And that was for me like eye-opening, that this is really the first thing of its kind. So
great. Thanks, Abby. Any other questions from any of Abby's distinguished guests on the Zoom? Is that enough wait time, Abby? If not, I'm going to ask you all to Zoom off and excuse yourselves, and we will continue on with our discussion with the committee. And I want to thank everyone for joining. Just really great.
Thank you for being
here.
here.
Do you want to jump in there? I saw you had your hand up.
Oh, no, I just wanted to say good luck. You're doing great.
Thanks. I hope to make it out to visit you before too long.
Yep, to the Oregon coast. We'll see you soon.
Yeah, hey, thanks. Thank you for joining us. Seymour, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I won't take any of Abby's time, but at some point I'd love to talk to you. And I heard you mention Arts Propel, which I'm very interested in. I'm also interested if you remember Arts Impact. I was a teacher in an Arts Impact. It was kind of a next iteration, I think, of Arts Propel. So maybe sometime we'll get a chance to talk about that. But it was my favorite elementary school where I ever taught, and it was all about integrating the arts. So it's really good. But
well,
thanks for joining us. It was just great to have you. I really appreciate you coming.
Great to be part of this. Thank you. And good luck, Abby.
Thanks, Seymour.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Well, Abby, we will. Looks like we're just left with your graduate committee. So we've chased everybody away, and you brought out a good crowd, by the way. It's very nice. So